Okay, can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yay! All right. Okay, good. All right, well, that's good to hear at least. Wow.
He's got a voice.
I do have a voice. Good morning. How's everybody doing on this?
All right. Good morning.
It's definitely a Monday, isn't it?
For sure.
Okay. All right. Well, at least now we can talk to each other. That's a good thing. Okay. So, yeah. Couple things I wanted to bring up. Now that I can actually talk to all of you, and we can see each other and all that fun stuff. One, we are going to watch a video today, and I'm going to break it up into two segments because it's kind of long. We're going to watch about an hour each, each segment, this morning and then about an hour this afternoon. Okay. And Wanda, I know you submitted a lot of work, and I want to get around to talking about that. We'll probably do that on Wednesday in the painting group. Okay. And actually, I'm going to let Wanda kind of actually run a class here for a second.
No, what?
Well, hang on. Okay, because
Go, Charles.
Well,
Go, Wanda.
because Wanda got inspired, talking about the colorist, and she went and did a bunch of research. Okay, and she's got some things that she found out that she could share with us. Okay, she sent me an email, and she sent me some images, and anyway, I won't get into the minutia of where these artists are at or whatever, but she picked some great artists. Why don't you talk about who you found, Wanda?
Right now?
Yeah, like right.
Okay. Well, there were several Black artists. They may not have been around during the Scottish colorists, but the work that they did was similar to it. And it was, let me see, Elizabeth Catlett, she's one, and Lois Jones, Sam Dillon. They had some beautiful work, and the color and the artwork was just awesome. And it was practically, so the same as what Charles showed us on the videos. And I just thought that was just remarkable because they were at different times, and how the color and the impressions and cubism and all that kind of stuff all came together. I just enjoyed doing it. Good.
Yeah, and these are artists that I have not looked at. They're artists that I'm not really familiar with, and so and this is a great thing about having kind of a class or an open forum like this, is that if you have a particular artist that you see that you're really impressed by their work and stuff, share it, bring it to the class. Because hey, I can learn something too, we all can. And
yes.
And just having the opportunity, it's like the more work, from a wider field of people that you can see, you can really learn a lot, through that kind of experience. And so, yeah, I highly encourage all of you to, find things that interest you and share them. Regardless of the time period, whether they're contemporary artists from now or whether they're someone back in history. Because again, there's just so much out there. It's like, we'll probably never get around to covering it all. If you did nothing but stay on the computer and read art books from now through the rest of your life, you wouldn't get around to everybody. It's just enormous. And in fact, that's a good segue into the video that we're going to watch, because this is kind of, and the reason I'm playing this video is it's something that most people, in the Western world don't think about. Okay. And we really don't think about how influenced Western art was by Islam. Okay. Um, it's not talked about a lot, but I think you'll find, after watching this video, that there were, huge contributions to contemporary art, architecture, just, how we live. And I think this guy dispels a lot of myths about, that part of the world and the religions and who those people really were and are. Okay. So sit back, we're going to watch an hour of this. I apologize for the technical problems this morning. I have no clue as to what it's all about. But yeah, it seems to be working now that we've restarted the computer. So if there's any issues, if you can't hear, please let me know. Okay. And we'll figure this out. Okay. So let's get started.
Can we all mute, Charles?
No, you're not on mute. Do you want to?
No, I said, can we all mute while we're watching the video?
Yes, that would actually be a great idea. If you will all mute yourself, then yeah, that would be a big help. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And let's see. In fact, maybe I'll do the mute all. Okay, continue. All right. Screen share. I hope everybody's got their popcorn and their coffee.
Well, we've got the coffee.
Today, 9th of July, 2005. I'm in Mali, in West Africa, where I've come to see the biggest mud building in the world. The Great Mosque of Djenné, an astonishing sight. Driving up here yesterday, the mobile phone rang, and I heard that 7 bombs had exploded in London that morning. Hundreds were injured, scores were dead. The handiwork, probably, of Al-Qaeda. Among the stations that were bombed was the one my daughter uses to go to school. I spent a horrible couple of hours battling with lousy phone connections, finding out she was all right. You think dark things at moments like that, and I fretted about this film. Was it right to be making it? It's about the wonders of Islamic art, but was that still an appropriate subject? I knew the answer long before I arrived here and saw that. I had just spent months and months crisscrossing the Islamic world, and everywhere I'd been, I'd seen fascinating and beautiful things. Some of the most fascinating and beautiful things I had ever seen, made by fascinating, beautiful people who had never shown me anything but kindness, friendship, and hospitality. Not to have made this film would have been utterly dishonest. There's something over there I wanted to show you. We're coming at it from an unusual angle from the back, but you'll recognize it straight away when you see it. It's a beautiful example of Islamic art. Perhaps the most beautiful example of all. Rather like the typical Islamic work of art, the real story of Islam is sparkling, fascinating, complicated, and gorgeous. And the best way to tell it is not with scary interviews and politics. That's just news. The winds of time will blow all that away. The truest evidence that any civilization ever leaves behind about itself is its art. Art never lies. It didn't lie about the Greeks, it didn't lie about the Romans, and it certainly doesn't lie about Islam. Ah, the Taj, the Taj. The most beautiful building in the world? Of course it is. So beautiful, so Islamic. There are various stylistic features to enjoy about the Taj that make it typically Islamic. The love affair that's going on here with simple, gleaming geometry. No other religion has ever trusted geometry as profoundly as this. This sense of perpetual decoration, of saying it with flowers. And all this sensuous calligraphy, words turned into art, quotations from the Quran, an Islamic speciality. But there's something else, something that unites all Islamic art from nation to nation, across the centuries, like a super glue. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it the atmosphere of paradise. See what I mean immediately? It's that air of delicate, God-given perfection, of dreams fulfilled and divine tranquility. It's unmissable and so desirable. How Islam developed this addictive appetite for paradise, when, where, and why it was developed is quite a story. It's our story. Islam emerged in some of the world's hottest and least hospitable places. Its creators were desert people. Its moods were desert moods. And to get a feel for its art, I suggest we consider the desert dweller's relationship to an oasis.
Reach all your gear in 1.1 seconds. Introducing the top shelf camera.
Islam has its own calendar. Day 1 of this calendar marks the departure of the Prophet Muhammad, Islam's founder, from Mecca, where he was born, and his arrival at the oasis of Medina, where he settled and built himself a very significant house. The Prophet didn't select the exact spot for his new house himself. He left the choice to his camel, which, guided by Allah, stopped at some open land owned by 2 orphaned brothers. The Prophet purchased this land, and on it he built his new dwelling. When asked to explain this simple choice, he said, "A man is where the saddle of his camel is." The land had some palm trees on it, which Muhammad cut down, and he marked out a typical Arabian dar, a walled courtyard made of mud bricks, much like these, except a lot bigger. It was square, 50 meters by 50 meters, and it had these humble dwellings along the edges, and the walls were about 10, 11 feet high, like these are. On the edge of the courtyard, the Prophet built some huts for his wives. modest mud brick structures with palm roofs. At the centre, he dug a well. Later, when his followers complained of sitting in the exposed sun, he gave them shelter, a simple portico of palm tree columns covered with palm leaves. The first mosque. Every mosque that came afterwards is descended architecturally from this simple, rustic arrangement of the Prophet's house in Medina. And there's something else that the house in Medina bequeathed to all subsequent mosques, and that's its communal air. These Middle Eastern courtyards have so many roles. It's where the animals are tethered, it's where the washing's done, it's where food is cooked, it's where the Prophet preached to his followers, and where sometimes the followers would stay overnight in the shade of the portico. And this sense of a community going about its business behind protective walls was another of the great gifts to the future of the Prophet's dwelling. The mosque began its marvelous and busy history not as a temple or a daunting place of worship, but as a home. Originally at prayer times, the community would turn to pray in the direction of the holy city of Jerusalem. But then, one momentous night, the angel Gabriel came to the Prophet in a dream and showed him Mecca. He actually saw the city through a miraculous gap in the vista. And from that moment, the orientation of every mosque was changed and turned to Mecca. The direction of Mecca is marked by the mihrab, a niche in the Qibla wall. Sometimes simple, sometimes gorgeous, sometimes plain, sometimes filled with the flowers of paradise. But the mihrab is always turned to Mecca. So let's see, there's paleontology, then archaeology, sociology. There we go, the map room. The medieval map of the Islamic world. It's pretty accurate, but can you see where you live on it? No, that's because in these medieval maps of the Islamic world, north and south are the other way round. North is at the bottom and south is at the top. But if I turn this upside down, it all becomes more familiar. There's Italy, Sicily, the Mediterranean. There's Spain, North Africa. And Islam began on the Arabian Peninsula here, where Muhammad was born in Mecca in around 570 AD. That's 570 years after the birth of Jesus Christ. But this brand new religion spread across the world at an astonishing speed. Within a century, the Islamic Empire stretched from Spain over here, all the way across North Africa, through Central Asia, right up to the Chinese borders. It was the most explosive expansion that any religion had ever mounted. At first, with all this conquering going on, there wasn't much time for art.
Faster work,
Sorry for
stunning
that.
movies and shows, and
art. But that changed when the Islamic capital was moved from Mecca here southwards, or northwards as we'd call it, to this great city here. Damascus, the world's oldest inhabited city, they say, and one which used to be notoriously beautiful. Today, the entire city has turned to face an electronic Mecca, called to prayer by the satellite dish. But in less trashy times, Damascus worshipped better deities with more glorious consequences. It's written that Muhammad, on a trip from Mecca, got as far as the outskirts of Damascus, and then he stopped. He refused to go any further. When asked why, he explained that man should only enter paradise once, and that one time was on the day he died. Famed internationally for its luxuries and its fertility, Damascus was such a desirable oasis, so full of many precious things, that everybody wanted it. The Phoenicians were here, Hittites, Assyrians, Babylonians, Greeks, Romans, Christians, they all lent Damascus their ear. And right here, there was a pagan temple to the Aramaean god Hadad. Now that was taken over by the Romans. See the Corinthian columns there, and that large chunk of pediment. That's what's left of one of the largest temples to Jupiter in the whole of the ancient world. And it looked rather like that. See here, the entrance gate where the columns still are, and there in the middle, the sanctuary where the famous statue of Jupiter stood. The Romans converted to Christianity with Constantine when the Roman Empire became the Byzantine Empire. This became a Christian church, a basilica, in which were preserved some very precious relics, because it was said that buried here was the head of John the Baptist. And when the Muslims conquered Damascus, around these precious remains was built this huge mosque. Nearly a century after they arrived here, Muslims shared this space with Christians. The Christians would worship at the west end here, and Muslims would worship at the east end. It was a working religious timeshare. But eventually, the caliphs, Muhammad's successors, who had moved their capital from Mecca to Damascus, realized they needed a place of worship of their own. And so here, on the former temple of Jupiter that had become the Christian church, they set about inventing the Islamic mosque. The land was actually purchased from the Christians who owned it by the Umayyad Caliph Al-Walid I, for whom money was never an object. His mosque was built in a decade at stupendous expense. 7 years of taxes from the whole of Syria were spent on it before it was finished in 715. Not only is it the earliest surviving mosque, but to this day it remains amongst the most spectacular. The chief treasures of this Damascus mosque are its mosaics in twinkling glass and gold. There's been so much argument about what the golden walls are showing us. What is this fantastic architecture imagined here? Where are these rivers? Where are those trees? Some say these are perfect evocations of Damascus itself, beautified and watered. Others believe the mosaics represent the Muslim conquests, that Al-Walid I was showing the world what Islam now possessed. Personally, I just don't believe any of that. This doesn't feel at all aggressively possessive, and it doesn't look anything like Damascus. What you feel with these luxurious trees, so bounteous and green, the rippling waters, the fantastic palaces, is a sense of somewhere perfect and peaceful, somewhere like paradise. This is what Muhammad wanted to see once and only once. Even the colours of those mosaics, that luscious green, the sumptuous gold, those are the colours described in the Quran of paradise. But look, there's no one there yet. No people, no animals. It's ready, but it's empty and waiting for us. All we have to do is lead the right life, do the right things.
Military-grade handheld telescope is
Sorry.
taking over the market in the U.S. This is an extremely...
And follow.
YouTube, and you gotta have ads now.
I've seen wall-to-wall imaginings of paradise like these before in Buddhist fresco cycles. If you go to India or China, and of course the traders of Damascus were famous for such travels, you'll find painted caves filled with visions of paradise, palaces, rivers, bridges, gold, trees. So Islam took all these ingredients, bits of the Christian basilica, pieces of the Roman temple, visions of paradise from the Buddhists, and it mixed them all together and came up with something completely unmistakable and Islamic, something the world had never seen before. Yet how clearly you sense here the basic arrangement of Muhammad's simple courtyard. A covered hall to shelter the faithful from the sun, a fountain at the center to wash at and purify yourself, the sense of a meeting place to which everyone is invited. Having settled on this basic arrangement for its first great mosque, Islam liked it so much it stayed with it for 1,000 years and beyond. I wanted to show you this unusual structure. It's where the treasures of the mosque were kept, an early Islamic bank vault set high up on these Roman columns that don't quite fit. Now up here, look carefully, there's a sundial that was used to calculate the times of the call to prayer when every Muslim was expected to turn to Mecca. Now that's a very easy thing to say. At the call to prayer, you turn to Mecca. But how exactly would somebody living in 8th century Damascus know where Mecca was? It's relatively easy here. Mecca isn't that far away. But what if you come from West Africa, from Timbuktu, or Samarkand in Central Asia, or Genghis Khan country? Well, you begin by inventing some helpful instruments like these. Astronomy, mathematics, geometry. Arabian science was far ahead of the West in all of them. And such exquisite instruments were fashioned by Islamic craftsmen to make simpler the difficult task of knowing exactly where Mecca was. The desert palace of Kirbat al-Mafah was probably built by Al-Walid II, the playboy of the Umayyads. This was his pleasure ground in the Judean desert, far from Damascus, where Al-Walid II could let his hair down, which he did. Al-Walid II was a famous lover of hunting, and this desert palace was built on the banks of a fertile wadi and was originally surrounded by a huge hunting park. Meanwhile, the insides leave you in little doubt that Al-Walid II enjoyed other pleasures too. Curvy and topless dancing girls, busty and brazen, lined the walls here to ceiling height and set a mood for the palace that was most unlikely. The desert palace had a special room for playing music, and this spectacular bathroom, which now hides a secret floor. So Haldun, you're in charge of the mosaics here, and when you walk into this space, which was the giant bath of the Caliph before, you don't actually see any mosaics on the ground, but if I rub the sand here, will I find mosaics?
Where everywhere you will find the mosaic.
Can you show me?
Yeah.
Brush your teeth in less than 10 seconds with this revolutionary toothbrush.
Sorry.
It was created by a well-known...
Because we covered.
The sand is protective sand, yeah?
Yeah.
To protect it.
Yeah, we put sand, and after that we put the soil.
I'll let you dig for a bit.
Like that.
Yeah, I'll rub this, yeah?
Up there.
There is the leaf here. It's the sun. So this is the famous scene here of the knife with the fruit. That's right.
I think now you can say you discovered something.
I discovered the lost fruit symbolism of the Umayyad caliphs. Well, it does look very striking. The knife, the leaf representing the sun or paradise, perhaps, and this big juicy fruit. It's beautiful. The most famous mosaic here is in the guest room, where the caliph would entertain his guests. Can we see that now?
Yeah, sure. Which is named by the Tree of the Life.
The Tree of Life. Famous mosaic of the lion attacking a gazelle perhaps had an erotic context. The actual word, gazelle, which Arabic gave to English, is also the Arabic for love poetry. And since ancient times, mighty rulers of Al-Walid's type have thought of themselves as all-conquering lions. In Arabic poetry, and indeed in the poetry of Al-Walid II, for he was a poet too, the gazelle is invariably a female presence. With its big staring eyes and its long sensuous neck, it's a graceful animal equivalent of the beautiful virgins who await the good Muslim in paradise. Many people believe that figures are banned in Islamic art. Actually, they're not. Nowhere in the Quran does it say that an artist cannot depict or paint figures. What is frowned upon is the showing of idols in a religious context, and that's for obvious reasons. It's all down to the Ten Commandments. The second commandment, you may remember, says, "Thou shalt not make any graven image of anything that is on earth or on the sea below." And Islam, like Christianity, inherited that commandment from the Jews. Now, these three great religions, which all arose in the same place, have chosen to interpret this commandment in three different ways. Judaism has always frowned upon the making of any images. Christianity has always ignored the commandment. And Islam, well, Islam has swung this way and that way, depending on the fashion at the time. It looks as if it was Jewish converts to Islam who introduced this notion that images were taboo. Islam and Judaism, here and elsewhere, had so much in common. Above all, they shared this fierce antipathy to the ways of the Christians. This distrust of images just wasn't there in the beginning, and it was never universal, though it did have the most potent implications. It led to a lot of abstraction, led to new ways of understanding geometry, led to a renewed faith in the word. No one is certain where 1001 Arabian Nights was written. Probably here in Cairo. The atmosphere is certainly right. The streets here teem with rascals, smooth talkers and clowns. It's intoxicating, but also edgy. Religions attract conflict as well as stability. Destiny to play for, there's always room for differing opinions, and Islam is no different. The big split in Islam is between Sunni and Shiite. Someone once explained it to me as the equivalent in Christianity of the difference between Methodists and Catholics, with the Shiites as the Catholics. And it's true, Shiite art is usually more ornate and florid than Sunni. But sometimes it's the other way.
One of the biggest health trends right now is apple cider vinegar. It helps your body with so many things, but let's be honest, it's kind of
way round. With Islamic art, you never quite know where the journey's going to finish. But the reasons for the Sunni-Shiite split are plain enough. It was a dynastic dispute, an argument over who should lead Islam. The Shiites believed only those descended directly from the Prophet himself, family members, could claim to be his successor. The Sunnis, meanwhile, insisted that caliphs should be chosen for their organizational talents, their suitability, not their bloodline. So, was it reason or emotion, the brain or the blood? This is the shrine of Hussein, the Prophet's grandson and son of Fatima, Muhammad's favorite daughter. Fatima was married to Ali, who was chosen as caliph, one of Muhammad's successors, and then assassinated. His son, Hussein, went to war against the Sunni Umayyads to right this wrong, but he too was killed and his family murdered. Thus, blood entered the equation, lots of it, and in these parts, that's not quickly forgotten. The Shiites were marginalized by the Sunni caliphs and became the party of rebels and minorities. The disaffected turned to them. They were the Robin Hoods of Islam and learned to be utterly ruthless. Fated to remain a minority in the early Islamic world, the Shiites only claimed one major territory for themselves, and that was here in Cairo, when the Fatimids arrived. Fatimids took their name from Fatima, Muhammad's favourite daughter, the mother of Hussein. They too claimed descent from the Prophet, and these Fatimids built Cairo from scratch. There was nothing here when they arrived, and apparently they called their new capital Al-Qahira, the Conqueror, after the planet Mars, which was in the ascendancy when they got here. Some would say the planet Mars has been in the ascendancy around here ever since. The Fatimids were a revolutionary force in Islamic art. They changed many things. Here at the Azhar Mosque, bang in the heart of Cairo, they built a cluster of colleges devoted to the pursuit of knowledge. It was the world's first university, founded in 972. Yes, 972. The Fatimids were particularly keen on education as a way of spreading the Shiite theology and gaining extra converts in secret. It's a different route to power. Some still employ it. See these arches? Keel-shaped, they're called. Those were a Fatimid invention. Cairo is particularly good for arches. That mosque with the spiral minaret has pointed arches, superb pointed arches. They weren't an Islamic invention. The Sassanids had used them already, but Islam developed and popularized the pointed arch, and then passed it westwards so that the Gothic age could happen. Gothic owes so much to Islam. I love these spaces, these forests of columns. This is called the hypostyle type of mosque, which basically means that it has lots and lots of columns supporting a flat roof. It's a very simple way of building, descended directly from that portico in the Prophet's courtyard, where the palm trees and the thatch gave his followers somewhere to shelter from the sun. This does exactly the same. But see here, where the mihrab is, a small dome, a widening, because almost despite itself, Islam was developing a need to mark its most holy wall more grandly. It's a tendency we'll be keeping an eye on, because this need to rise up to dizzy heights becomes one of the key issues in Islamic architecture. The most famous of all Quranic verses is the one inscribed most often on mosque lamps. It's called the light verse, Surah 24:35. God is the light of heaven and earth. The similitude of his light is a niche in the wall. The glass appears as if it were a shining star.
We know this is royal. It was made for Sultan Barkuk, the Egyptian ruler. We know the date. This is about 1385.
It's dated, is it?
It's toward the end of, no, we know when he ruled. That's why we know the date.
And this would hang just
either in the mosque or in the house. But they call it mosque lamp because that is the description that was given when it was produced. But it didn't mean that it was specifically used in the mosque. It was probably used in probably homes and palaces too. And then there were chains coming from here, holding this. And most of the time, they had a ball, which was like an ostrich egg, sitting on the top of the lamp. And there was always a question, how come they needed to have an ostrich-shaped glass ball sitting between the chain that connected the lamp to the ceiling? And usually, obviously, they had candle inside. The reason was that they didn't want to have animals falling into it.
I see.
So if you
so you collected the flies.
That's correct. Or
and
flies,
the moths.
sometimes maybe mice. They fall outside of the lamp rather than falling into it.
It's excellently practical.
Yeah.
Can you imagine this though, with a candle inside flickering?
Thinking that this is
What's
almost
that?
700 years old.
Ah. Has a special relationship with precious stones. You know those stories of Cleopatra's fabulous emerald mines? Well, they're not stories. Cleopatra really did have fabulous emerald mines, and she was an ancient Egyptian connoisseur of the sparkling gemstone, as were the Fatimids. The most precious and magical of all Fatimid treasures were actually made from the most abundant mineral on Earth. Scientists, who have their own miraculous ways of calculating these things, tell us that 12% of the Earth's crust is made of quartz. And quartz, in its clearest form, is called rock crystal. They don't mine it around here anymore, but they used to. It was as common in the deserts of Egypt as sand. Actually, it basically was sand, silicon dioxide. But the craftsmen of the Fatimids worked great magic with rock crystal. They took blocks of it, much larger than this, and carved away the insides until the walls of their rock crystal ewers and drinking glasses were as thin as paper. Crystals, like these, are of course what crystal balls used by fortune tellers used to be made from. And crystals always had this otherworldly aspect. The actual word comes from the Greek kristallos, which means ice. And the ancients believed this really was divine ice, trapped in the mountains, waiting to be revealed. And all this superstitious history, this magic air, brought extra sparkle to the rock crystal masterpieces of the Fatimids. There's something else about rock crystal, something even more pertinent than its delicate beauty and its mystical air. According to the Quran, the goblets passed around among the faithful in paradise are also carved of rock crystal. Changed countries. We're in Iran, or Persia as it used to be known. And if you're ever assailed by doubts about Islam's contribution to the arts, if anyone ever asks you, what have the Muslims done for us? Get yourself here on a sunny day. Hunt down a taxi and head for Gombad-e-Kavus. Ask there for the tomb of Amor Kabus Ibn Vashingir. You can't possibly miss it. When do you think that was built? 1950s? 30s? The 18th century? The 15th century? The 13th, actually, it was finished.
I look younger? Already.
In 1006. It's 1,000 years old. When this was built, William the Conqueror hadn't even been born. The chief religion around here before the coming of Islam was Zoroastrianism. It's still the oldest surviving faith in the world. The Zoroastrians built these tall towers for their dead, on which vultures would swoop and pick clean the corpse's bones. It's a highly efficient avian hygiene. And these Zoroastrian death towers influenced the look and the mood of some extremely unlikely Islamic architecture that's dotted all along the Caspian coast. This spectacular and unlikely tomb was built by a formidable local Renaissance man, Amir Qaboos Ibn Vashimgir, poet, scholar, calligrapher, astrologer, chess player, and ruthless regional warlord. Ibn Vashimgir ruled Gombad for 40 years. And when he began to suspect that his time might be up, he built this great mausoleum for himself here on the edge of the Turkoman steppe. It was built to be indestructible. It's 170 feet tall, and there's another 35 feet hidden from sight underground in the foundations. It's a masterpiece of unexpected minimalism, so sparse. Those razor-sharp edges, flanges they're called, go all the way around the building. They're made from desert bricks, and they cut the shadows up into thin stripes and then spend the whole day rearranging them. That's all that goes on here, but it's enough. And I like that cheeky conical cap that tops it off so perfectly. Ibn Vashimgir was assassinated 6 years after his great tower was finished. His enemies tied him up in the snow at nearby Gorgon and watched him freeze to death. But he was buried as he wanted to be, his body suspended from the tower roof in a see-through coffin made of rock crystal. There's a tiny window up there, and every time the sun rose, a shaft of light would penetrate the darkness of the tower and illuminate Ibn Vashimgir's crystal coffin. I'm not sure I can think of a more exciting way to die. Still in Iran, where I've come to the tomb of the Ayatollah Khomeini to gather my thoughts and set myself some priorities. If you can't gather your thoughts here, where can you gather them? This film has a simple proposition that Islam has given the world some of its most beautiful things. We tend these days to forget that. We tend to let transient stuff like politics elbow out the ancient truths. So I wanted to read some poetry in here. British soldiers used to recite this to themselves in the First World War as they marched to their deaths on the Western Front. And our grandparents used to know large chunks of this by heart. It's by the 11th century Persian poet Omar Khayyam. and it captures so perfectly the fragility of Khayyam's times, indeed, of everyone's times. Strange is it not that of the myriads who before us passed the door of darkness through, not one returns to tell us of the road which to discover we must travel too. Yesterday, this day's madness did prepare, tomorrow's silence, triumph or despair. Drink, for you know not whence you came, nor why. Drink, for you know not why you go, nor where. Life is short. Sultans, presidents, and ayatollahs come and go. But there's a beauty out there that can always be relied upon. A bigger beauty that Islamic art wants always to reflect and match. This film is about that quest.
If you are not a nudist, style is for you. I've been in the fashion.
The trouble is that, like so many things in Islam, this elusive beauty keeps changing. The Islamic Empire was packed with far too many different types of international creative ever to arrive at a consensus. Isfahan, on the hot edges of the Persian desert, was a particularly busy trading city which everyone tried to grab. For 200 years, it was controlled by the Seljuks. They lost it to the Mongols. Then the Timurids took over. Finally, Isfahan fell to the Safavids, who ruled here in the 16th century, and whose artistic achievements were surprisingly frisky. The Safavids built half a dozen of these ambitious and charming bridges across the Zayende River. These high walls protected the incoming camel caravans from sandstorms and vicious desert crosswinds. The Safavid bridges had two levels. Underneath the camel level, there's a chain of tea rooms stretching across the river where visitors and locals alike have spent 500 years sheltering from the heat, smoking hookahs, quoting Omar Khayyam, sipping tea and keeping their heads down. It's usefully out of sight down here. The tea rooms have special compartments for rent where all sorts of mildly illicit things go on. I've just seen the chap and his girlfriend ensconced in one, and she was puffing away merrily at her hookah, which in modern Iran is rather naughty of her. In Isfahan, since the time of the Safavids, a certain amount of Islamic rule breaking has always gone on, and not just in the tea rooms. The Safavids were the first Shiite rulers of Persia, and their taste in art had about it a transgressive air, a Shiite ornateness. The Shahs of the Safavids were, you feel, instinctive pleasure seekers, free thinkers, and rule breakers. Dancing girls, a pair of them. Who would have thought it? You find them hidden around various corners of Isfahan, because the Safavids tore up the old Islamic rule book and wrote themselves a new one. Having made Isfahan their capital, they built it quickly into the grandest city in Persia. This Safavid square out here, Imam Square, is the second largest square in the world. Only Tiananmen Square in Beijing is bigger than this. And the entire perimeter is ringed with great architecture. 2 mosques, a palace, and over there, the entrance to the infamous Isfahan Bazaar, where only a brave man should ever venture. This gigantic pleasure piazza was laid out by the most ruthless and dynamic of the Safavid Shahs, Shah Abbas the Great. He used to sit up on that balcony and watch military parades passing by, and for 400 years, the square was also used as a polo pitch, and these were the two goalposts. Opposite his balcony, Shah Abbas constructed a gorgeous mosque for the ladies of his harem. You enter it through a secret passage that winds you round and round till you point in the right direction and face Mecca. Our cameraman, Simon, has been complaining about coming into these gorgeous Persian spaces. He says it's too dark in here. And it's true. The camera can never see what I can see. And it can never fall in love with Persian darkness in the way the human eye can and must. Don't ask me where anything ends in here or anything begins. I just can't tell you. The tile work doesn't really favour solidity. It rises up, 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 and when it gets to the dome, it becomes extra miraculous. Can you see how the lozenges get smaller and smaller and create a tiled whirlwind that sucks you up? The man who designed and calculated this domical effect had phenomenal hand-to-eye coordination and an extreme sense of geometry. Modern Iran, where a woman cannot show her hair or her forearms, where the morality police can forcibly remove your nail varnish and submit you to a virginity test, has had to reach a difficult accommodation with the art of the Safavids.
Chapter 6, Mentors. In his second year at Auburn and his fourth year,
These treasures of Isfahan attract too many moneyed visitors to be locked away. But as you wander amongst them, I swear you can sometimes hear an angry Ayatollah going tut, tut, tut. The most perfectly preserved of the Safavid pleasure gardens is the Chehal Sotun Palace. It's gorgeous, it twinkles, it's a man-made paradise with birds, flowers, and a sense of enclosure. This is where the Safavid Shahs welcomed foreign visitors and set out to impress them. The glass in the portico was imported expensively from Venice, and it attempts many Islamic tricks with reflections. But it's in here, in the great hall of the Safavids, that the most surprising spectacle awaits you. A monumental Islamic fresco cycle. Now that is a turn-up. The Safavids waging battles, the Safavids throwing ostentatious banquets, lounging around, listening to music, drinking wine. It's the Persian miniature writ huge and given monumental ambition. This was surprising enough, but then I went in here and I found a painted harem. In 1979, when the Islamic Revolution erupted in Iran, some fanatics stormed this palace and tried to attack these frescoes, but loyal palace workers stood in front of them and refused to budge. Because of course, this is Islamic art too, as authentic, as dazzling, as traditional as the sacred geometry Like all the great art traditions of the world, there's more than one colour, more than one tone to Islamic art. Here's Surah 76 from the Quran, verses 11 to 22. And because they were patient and constant, he will reward them with a garden and garments of silk, and amongst them will be passed round vessels of silver and goblets of crystal, and they will be adorned with bracelets of gold, and the Lord will give them to drink of a wine pure and holy. Verily, this is a reward for you, and your endeavour is accepted and recognised.
All the colors you see here is natural color. That's why, because they use natural colors, it stayed. It didn't fade away.
Phenomenal colours. Phenomenal.
What you see in front of you here is probably one of the finest 16th century Safavid carpets in the world. The inscription that you see around it is Persian poetry, which relates to the design of the carpet. It talks about flowers, it talks about birds, it talks about the beauty of nature.
Would it be true to say that this is an evocation of paradise in the Quranic sense? That, I mean, people have said almost all carpets have as an ambition this need to convey some of the sensations of paradise, the pleasures of paradise, the mood of paradise.
Yes, you could say that. You could say that.
I'm in Uzbekistan, deep in Central Asia, dodging the trucks. It's hairy, but I like it, because I know what lies at the end of the journey.
Samarkand, Samarkand, yıldızlar mekanı, şartlar donası. Samarkand, 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 losing sun.
An amusing tale is told about the arrival of the Arabs in Samarkand. I find it amusing anyway. There were 3 Arab missionaries who stopped here and decided to let Allah decide their fate by cutting up and boiling a large sheep. The first missionary reaches into the pot and he pulls out the sheep's heart, and he knows that he must return to Mecca, the heart of Islam. The second missionary, he reaches in and pulls out the sheep's head, and he knows he has to stay here in Samarkand. The third missionary, he reaches in and he pulls out the sheep's arse, and he knows that he must leave immediately for Baghdad, which he does.
This life-saving device stops a person from choking in seconds.
Okay, come on.
Do you know?
All right.
But me, I'm staying here, Samarkand.
This is probably a good place to kind of break it, and then we'll come back this afternoon for the rest of it, because we've got about an hour, more or less, of this video to watch. But anybody got any comments on anything they've seen or heard so far?
It's really long.
It is very long. Yes, I know. That's kind of.
You lost me. Oh.
What was in the first half? 'Cause I didn't get back until 10:30. I didn't see the first half of the this. Was
Okay.
it of the buildings?
Well, what I'll do is
More
I'll
history.
I'll send out a link, for this, so you guys can watch sections of it or whatever you want to do, because it is very long. Okay, but mainly what he did is he kind of set the context for this film and about it. What it's really all about is the contribution of Islamic art to even like Western art. You know, the things that we basically, you know, took from them that a lot of people don't really understand or don't really spend a lot of time thinking about. And it's one of those things that don't get nearly enough you know, focus when you start reading about art history and about how influenced Western art was by, you know, this whole religious movement of Islam, and how, you know, through the centuries, Western art and Islamic art have kind of mingled, and you know, they've influenced each other, you know, greatly.
That's what I was wondering is what he really showed in the beginning, but now I can put it together myself.
Yeah, and you
Charles.
know, yes.
Curiosity about the domes. I didn't connect all the dots as to why they have so many things with the domes on them.
Right.
And it's like, was that a maybe weather thing, or even the arches that they did? You know, was it just because they liked it like that? Because most of it was architectural. So curious.
Right. Well, and okay, I'm not going to get too far into that because actually he talks about that, you know, and when we come back this afternoon, he'll get into that a little bit more. But you know, just as kind of a brief overview, probably the thing that Islam gave to Europeans was they gave them back their history, in fact. Because if you think about time, you know, you had early Christianity, and then we went into this period called the Dark Ages, right? And during the Dark Ages, all of those European libraries, just about all knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, you know, medicine, you know, disappeared. And if it had not been for the libraries and things in Islam, scholars would have never gotten any of that information back. Because the one thing that Islam did was they preserved history, not only for themselves, but also, you know, European history, Egyptian history, you know, really for all the cultures around the world. And so they've been a repository of information that, you know, scholars can go back to now and look at. And they have the oldest records, other than the Buddhist, you know, they have the oldest records on the planet. Because literally, just about all knowledge in Europe was wiped out through the Dark Ages, and was literally lost. And so, you know, part of that was architecture, right? You know, you know, the Romans had built domes, and that was one of their big architectural achievements, of which then the Islamics took a couple of hundred years later and embellished and turned into this other thing, you know. And so they preserved a lot of that ancient knowledge of architecture and how to make a dome. And if they had not, then the Gothic age would have never happened. Those Gothic churches would have never been built, you know, because they wouldn't have had the mathematical knowledge and geometry and architecture to build those buildings. See, so, you know, you're talking, you know, this probably about the 8th, 9th century, you know, when Europe began to come out of the Dark Ages, and to actually, you know, begin to build, you know, that early Gothic architecture. And, you know, if they hadn't had some connection to Islam, who had been building those buildings for 300-400 years at that period of time, you know, they would have had nothing to learn from, and they would have never gotten built. So that's kind of the tie-in there. Is that both
Not an
cultures have kind of contributed back and forth.
I'm not an expert on Islam or anything, but he kind of lost me, and I was in and out anyway because I was busy. But he lost me when he said something about that the figure, they don't do a lot of figures because of something in the Hebrew Bible that says, that mentions that, but he misquoted that scripture too. The scripture says something about not making images of things in heaven and things that are beneath the earth. And he said something about in the earth. So I know that wasn't right.
Or the yeah, on the earth or below the sea. And
not on the earth, not on the earth. Yeah, that's not in there.
Well,
that's a misquote.
It depends on which Bible you read. Okay.
Well, I read, I have several of them.
Right. Yeah, there's different ones. And yeah, they all generally kind of say the same thing. But what he was saying is that in Islamic art, in the beginning, there really, it kind of, depending on where you were, it got interpreted in different ways. He went to Iran, right, for example, and so you're looking at examples of early Islamic art were the Safavids, who had no problem in depicting human figures and animals and everything else, and that was in Persia, in Iran. But if you went to, say, like in Mecca, okay, which was Arabia, then they frowned on that, and it all sort of depended on where you were and what the influences were.
Excuse me, a lot of Islam is taken from Judaism. Judaism
Right, it is.
no graven images. So
Right.
Judaism was before Christianity.
Yes.
And because the Muslims were close to the Jews, they have a lot of dietary things.
Right.
They wear things to cover their heads like Judaism. A
Right.
lot of Islam is taken from the Jews.
Exactly.
And they liked the Jews and admired them. They turned on the Jews when the Jews would not convert, just like the rest of the world. They hated the Jews when the Jews would not convert.
Well,
But they took
again,
a lot of this is from Judaism,
yeah.
not Christianity. It's from Judaism.
Right.
And the high buildings, it was a very hot climate, and so you could see why they would want the high buildings. Also, of course, it was so hot that if you made a lot of light come in, you would be too hot.
Mhm.
So you have to take account where they were in the world,
Right.
their architecture, because of that. But a lot of what they did, they didn't do graven images. A lot of the most beautiful Islamic art is in southern Spain, where the Muslims were there for 500 years. And a lot of the design is their words, because no graven images taken from Judaism.
Yeah.
Not Christianity.
Right. Yeah, and that's
Don't forget, like my grandfather was also an engineer like myself and built those pyramids in Egypt.
Oh, okay.
So all the Jews were building there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, the Jews built the Colosseum. The slaves built the Jewish slaves built the Colosseum.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's interesting. We're always there, right?
Well, and
absolutely.
Don't forget us.
And the blacks were builders too back then. They didn't call them blacks then, but they were there too. They were doing a lot of the building in Egypt.
Right.
And North Africa.
Right.
Right, and that's how it started, also. Because and correct me if I'm wrong. Are they called Jews because they're from Jerusalem?
No.
The Jewish people?
No.
No, I
Then
think
why? Where did that word derive from?
Right.
Where did that word derive from? Was that the religion, Jewish religion?
Right. I'm not exactly
Abraham
sure.
is
let me
Jacob
know.
Abraham somewhere there.
But the point this film, I think, makes, very clear is that, yes, you have a part of the world in which you have not only the Christian, Muslim or Islamic, and the Jewish religions coming together, but you also had kind of a confluence of Buddhism, Hinduism. It was a crossroads. And so there's people from everywhere, that went to this part of the world. And one of the things that Islam was very good at was taking from all of these cultures and distilling it down, into their poetry, into their art, into their architecture. And so, anyway, we'll catch, more of this afternoon. But I guess, anybody got anything else that they want to point out about this film so far?
I'm impressed by the size of the buildings that they had out there. How in the world could they build those huge buildings without concrete?
Yeah.
Well, look at the pyramids in Egypt. They're huge too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually,
And how they formed that without having the type of mechanics we have now.
Mhm.
These lifters and different things that went on. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah, if you actually talk to a lot of architects, and anybody who's into architecture and studies architecture, actually there are things that they could have done, 2,000 and 3,000 years ago that we have absolutely no idea how they would have done it, and we would have no actual way of doing it ourselves even today.
I have read that ancient civilizations were highly intelligent and more intelligent than we are today, and that because of time and merging civilizations and things things have been changed.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of history that we're just beginning at this stage of the 21st century to begin to re-examine and rewrite. And again, Western culture has influenced history in such a way because, they were obsessed with writing it and recording it. But, so was Islam, and so was, the Buddhists and Hindus. And if you go to these different parts of the world and you go back and you read these histories, some of them have very different stories. In fact, one of the things that I'm really looking at and studying right now is, there's pretty clear evidence that the Chinese may have been in North America 300 to 400 years before Columbus ever made it.
Yes, I've read that too.
Yeah. And of course the Vikings were here 300 to 400, maybe 500 years even before Columbus. So much history has actually been, sort of lost. And we're just beginning to get kind of this view on the ancient world. And it's typically human, I think, to think that, we live in the most modern, advanced time possible. But the fact is, in many ways, we're just catching up. We're catching up to a world that probably existed, and they had far more things figured out than we would have ever imagined. And it's fascinating, interesting.
I look, because if you keep going back and back and back, trying to figure out who was first and who did, because somebody asked, religion probably emerged because people needed something to believe in when life was so harsh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and I think that's even true today. But that's a whole nother discussion we can get down. That's another road. Jackie, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I Googled, somebody asked about where did the Jew come from, the word.
Jew, yeah.
And it originated in the biblical, from the Hebrew. It was from the word Yehudi. And Yehudi is from the kingdom of Judah. You know, the 12 tribes of Judah, or in a more religious term, the whisperer. But Yehudi means from the kingdom of Judah.
Judah. Okay.
Yeah, and it originates with the ancient Israelites. Remember the Israelites in the 12 tribes of Judah? And that's how Jew came about.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Also, he said it's in the 10 Commandments from Christianity, no graven images. That comes from Judaism.
Well,
10 Commandments are not
Christianity.
in the Christianity.
The Old Testament
they came
is Judaism. That came
Right.
from Judaism. If
Right.
you're
It
going
did.
back in history, he did not, as I'm concerned, he did not give the Hebrews and the Jews enough credit because they were close to that's where the Muslims and the Jews live. And they influenced each other. If you go to Israel now, the food in Israel is Muslim food. It's
Okay.
wonderful. And a lot of that is not Jewish food, it's Muslim food.
Okay.
So they influence each other.
Can I interject here? He said the 10 Commandments. He did not credit it to either the Christians or the Jews.
I heard him say Christianity.
He did.
I didn't hear that either.
I did.
But,
I did.
But in that specific case, he just said the 10 Commandments. And I agree with you. Yes, they came from Judaism, and, you know, the Christians adopted them, you know, from Judaism. But
That's right.
Right.
It's taken from the Jewish religion.
Right. So anyway.
We, the Jewish people, only use one. So it just, yeah.
I'm sorry, we missed that. What did you say, Susan?
Yeah, I just said that the 10th commandment was in the Jewish Torah readings. It's part of when Moses went to God and he received the 10 commandments from God. So it's a Jewish belief originally.
Yeah.
And then the different other religions adopted it through the years. When the Christianity was formed, they adopted the Jewish Torah readings, the Bible, and then they added their own also after Christ. But originally, all of this was from the 10 Commandments were Jewish. So
yeah, well, so was the Old Testament of the Bible.
Right. The Old Testament is the Jewish Bible.
Exactly.
That's what it is. It's the Jewish Bible.
Okay.
That's right.
And Jesus Christ was Jewish.
Yes, he
And
was.
Jesus Christ lived as a Jew and died as a
we
Jew.
also believe that he was a great man, but we just don't believe that he was the Messiah.
Get into the
Yeah. So anyway,
question about who's first and who's first.
right? Yeah, and
We have to start going way back to why is there religion? So,
yeah, none of that really.
That's really a strange, interesting conversation to have, because then you have to, as I say, you have to start with why is there religion? If your whole discussion is going to be, well, who's first here and who's first there?
Well, if we wanted to go down that road, we would have to have a whole different class about a whole different thing.
We'd have a religious war.
It's not a war. It's not a war. It's history. It's not a war at all. It's history.
It's a discussion of history. It's a discussion of history.
It's not a war. It's history. You want to know the correct history.
Okay.
Just trying to
Okay.
understand the world that you live in.
All right, if I may.
Just trying to understand the world that you live in.
Okay.
Because we want our humanity didn't derive from religion.
All right, Bernice.
Humanity derived from the first creature that came up from the sea. You know, so that you say that's a whole another discussion.
Okay, Bernice. All right, if you will, please. Okay. yeah, this is a discussion that, yeah, this class is not about the origins of religion or things like that. Okay, what we're talking about is we're talking about art, the influence of art on, well, in this particular case, he's talking about the influences of Islam on Western art. And of course, we could get into the whole thing about how the Jewish culture influenced Islam, how it influenced, Christianity, and, vice versa, as far as even with the Eastern religions, Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism and all those different things. But the thing I think we want to focus on here is, what did they pass on, to our culture that we have today? And so, they certainly influenced architecture, astronomy, mathematics, and art in so many different ways. So we're going to come back this afternoon. We're going to pick up the rest of this film. And I guess what I would ask is, keep an open mind, and let's not get caught up too much in the religious aspect of it, because that's not really what it's all about. But
excuse me, I have a question.
May I say one other thing?
Sure.
I did note that the buildings, to me, this is what I got from it anyway. When he was showing the desert and the palm trees, and that if you look at the palm trees from the bottom, and it looks like that dome. When you look at the palm tree from the top, it looks like the top of the dome. It looks like a lot of the architecture was actually influenced by the shape of the palm tree.
Yeah, that's probable. That's possible. Yeah, I mean, I think all art, whether it's Asian, Islamic, Jewish, Christian, whatever, they all go back to nature. They all look at, the things that they're familiar with.
Are they gonna?
Yes.
Is the afternoon? Excuse me. Is the afternoon class gonna the film that we see there? Is it gonna mention how the Islamic art influenced paintings and all? Because I can see it in the architecture, but I don't recall a lot of influence through the images or paintings.
Well,
or drawings.
Yeah. Now, if you think back, okay, the section that we just watched on the Safavids and the murals.
Uh-huh.
I mean, those were all painted. Those were not mosaic. Okay. The Safavids in particular influenced Western art, with, painting murals.
Okay. I must have missed that.
Yeah. Yeah, remember he was inside the temple, and there were the paintings of the harems inside the building, and they were beautiful.
Okay.
Persian
paintings.
When
I was in and out.
Yeah, when you look
Go ahead, Wanda.
when you look at Islam and a lot of Islamic art, there aren't like huge amounts of murals painted. If they're done, mostly they're done in mosaic. And the reason that they were done in mosaic, like the floors in that palace that were buried, they intentionally buried those in dirt and sand to protect them, because it, but that whole area that whole floor of that palace was covered in mosaic tile, from wall to wall. So you just saw a very small section of it, but they tended to work in mosaic more than anything else because it was permanent. They didn't have to worry about it fading or going away over time, and that's kind of why they, because of the environment, that's why they chose that material to work in rather than a lot of painted murals. So.
I thought the mosaics were so beautiful. I love mosaic art. And I looked it up, and it said that it was started in the 3rd millennium BC, before Christ.
Right.
In Mesopotamia. I didn't know it had started in Mesopotamia.
Right. Yeah, it's really, well, the earliest mosaics and things that we found so far were back in those ancient cities of Ur and, areas around the, basically what became the Persian Empire, Assyrian. And that's the oldest that we found thus far. So,
I love mosaics. They taught us that last year, mosaic, in one of the classes, mosaic art, but they didn't teach us the history.
Right.
Thank you very much. That was interesting.
Yeah, it goes way back.
So I have a question. So with the mosaic and the murals that were shown in this video, were there paintings that you could hang on the walls, per se, as like at a museum or something that was done by people during this period of time?
The answer to that is yes. And there are not a lot of them left, historically, but really where you find a lot of images, painted images in Islam, is in their books. And in fact, again, going back to history, one of the things that, Islam influenced Western art in, and particularly like the Christian church, was in the later illuminations that happened, during the period of the emergence out of the Dark Ages. A lot of those monks, who were cloistered away, doing those illuminated manuscripts, they had learned those skills from, the Muslims, who they had come in contact with, and they had, taken that and began to develop that art form again to create libraries, because most of them had been destroyed at the end of the Roman Empire. So, that was that period of like Europe, coming out of the Dark Ages and learning, relearning or recapturing some of its history. And if it had not been for, the Islamic culture and their libraries, a lot of Christian and even Jewish scholars, wouldn't have had a resource to go back to, and read those manuscripts. The one thing that they were really good at that period of time, early history, was really hanging on to history. Not only of their own culture, but of, world culture, anybody they came in contact with. So
it's okay, because when they built that building to who was it, Jupiter or someone that the Romans came in and did? Yeah, the Romans came and did, and it seemed like they put that inside one of the buildings that, or areas that the people had built previously.
No, it was the Roman, temple had been there originally, and so later on, the Christians took it over and converted it into, like a cathedral, and then the Muslims came and took it over and turned it into a mosque. So it's had several different lives, but it started off as an ancient Roman temple.
Inside, in the city of.
Yeah, same place, but they just came and they just built around it and over it, and incorporated part of the architecture.
Oh, I see.
Into the building. If you'll notice, like in a lot of those mosques, a lot of those columns actually are Roman columns. So they would literally take down those ancient temples and reuse, those decorative pieces, those Roman columns and things, in the mosque. And, Christians did the same thing, when they did the Gothic churches and things like that. They would reuse part of those Roman temples. If you've got a resource that you can use, it's like, you know, why are you going to ignore that? If you need a column and there's a column there and it's already got, you know, a decorative piece at the top of it, just take it and use it. And that's what they did. They incorporated. See?
Can you imagine? Oh,
pardon?
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well.
What I was going to say was, you know how they bombed Syria recently? I just can't imagine how much beautiful art in these bombings that are being destroyed.
Right.
You know? Yeah, I'm going to research that. Because I know there's a lot of beautiful art. I wonder if they salvage some of it.
Well, you know, they're trying to preserve what they can, you know. But again, you know, because some of these locations are so historic and they don't necessarily jive with the scenario that people want to portray, because they want to rewrite history. A lot of those sites are being destroyed, you know, intentionally. You know, particularly like the ones, you know, in Iran, in Afghanistan, Pakistan, even India, for that matter of fact. Okay. And
interesting.
Yeah, that's going on worldwide right now. You know, unfortunately. So, I guess what it was about 20. Well, yeah, I guess it was about 20 years ago when we began to go into Afghanistan. One of the big things that the Taliban was doing is all over Afghanistan is they were going in and they were basically, you know, using dynamite to destroy these ancient Buddhist temples that had been there for almost 7,000-8,000 years.
Oh my goodness.
You know, literally just blowing up the whole side of the mountain to destroy them and to destroy the history, you know.
And who was doing this?
The Taliban in Afghanistan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were trying to erase, you know, the fact that in that part of the world, early Buddhism had actually, you know, sort of, it came out of India and, you know, and spread all through Asia, you know. And this was about, I guess, 6,000-7,000 years ago is when Buddhism actually began. It goes back quite a ways. So
that's interesting, Charles, because you say that they were trying to rewrite history. I can see that happening because a lot of things now are being changed and ignored.
Right.
And it's interesting that, you know, they would try to do that. Also, you know, throughout history, they've destroyed things like when Hitler was over there, he had the books burned. Right. So, and we're changing, we're not writing the textbooks of our history accurately.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's the same thing when Napoleon went through North Africa, you know, and he basically, you know, had his soldiers, you know, shooting off the noses of all of these Egyptian monuments. Why? Because they had African noses on them.
Right.
You know?
I remember reading that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, if you know, Egypt, you know, at the time was seen as the cradle of Western civilization, you know, and to have that come from a African source, oh my God, we couldn't do that. So again, you know, it's all about, you know, what's, you know, the viewpoints, you know, of different people through history. And yeah. So,
and my viewpoint is worth more than your viewpoint, right?
Well, and well, you know, yeah, people.
I mean, throughout history, that seems like what has been done. They're trying to promote whatever they think, which is good or bad.
Yeah. Well, who writes history, right?
Right.
It's the culture that dominates. You know, it's like right now, even in this country, we're just going back and re-examining history, you know, American history and what went on about, you know, Western expansion of this country and the native peoples that we displaced in their history. And, you know,
Right.
most of that has been, you know, pretty much so annihilated. And it was annihilated for,
Right. And
you know, because
they were here thousands of years before the Europeans got here.
right. And you can't have advanced civilizations in this country that were far more advanced than even a lot of the European cities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't, you know, how can you take a superior view, you know, of your culture if there were cultures who had cities with, like, for example, in Etowah, which is not far from here, in Cartersville.
Excuse me, everybody. I've got to go. I've got a class. So
Okay.
I'll see you all this afternoon.
Yeah, there was a city of almost 5 million people. You know, that's as big as Atlanta today. You know, but you know that doesn't get focused on a lot. You know, so
We can't find information on that either readily. You have to hunt for it.
well, you can go to the Etowah Mounds now, and and the history is pretty clear. But again, you know, that's not something that gets written into the history books, and it's not something that gets taught readily, you know, through our educational system. So, you know, so
Right. And
Like
Lake Lanier was a whole colony of people too that was destroyed when they put that, the Corps of Engineers put that water up there. So it's just a lot of things we don't know, and it's hard to find those things. I guess I need to check further.
Right. Well, and the thing is, you know, with any history, just keep in mind, you know, it's who's writing it, you know, and the viewpoint that they had, and that will give you some clue as to how accurate it may or may not actually be. So, you know, if you have different cultures from different parts of the world and they all kind of say the same thing and corroborate the same thing, then, you know, then you could say, okay, there's probably some actual fact and truth in it, you know. But, you know, that's one of the things that I think we're struggling with today as a culture, and as we become more of an interconnected culture across the world. It's like, you know, who's going to write that history, you know, and what is it really going to be? So anyway, we will be back this afternoon at it's 12 o'clock now. We'll be back at 2. We'll watch the rest of this, which I think is about probably 40 minutes, and then we'll kind of get back to this discussion and talk about other things as well. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sound fair?
Yes.
All right, and I'll try not to have sound problems when I come back. All right, you guys have a good lunch. We'll see you this afternoon. Okay.
See you all.
All right, bye.